Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to the mission of Croatia. I hope you will have a good and productive symposium. And let me start with the topic. I chose good governance and the rule of law because these days this is becoming the topic. Regardless whether you are speaking about peace, you are speaking about security, or you are speaking about development. But I will come to that shortly during our debate. I also chose to present this from two completely different perspectives. One is European Union perspective, which is in a way more narrow perspective because European Union is comprised of 28 member states. And from United Nations perspective, United Nations, as you know, it's comprised of 193 member states. And for many years, approach to this issue was somewhat different. But you will see that as time passes by, there are more and more similarities. But let me start by posing a question: what is a good governance? If you go to if you search for an official definition, you will have a hard time to find one because there is no single exhaustive definition. Let me quote what you can find on human rights, for instance, website saying there is no single and exhaustive definition of good governance, nor is there a delimitation of its scope that commands universal acceptance. But this doesn't mean that we all don't know what the good governance is. Of course we do. It's keeping your house on the local or state level in good order and producing good results in respective fields, regardless whether we are talking about social issues, economy, human rights. Good governance is doing things in the right way. When you have a private firm, being a good manager is primarily to produce profit for your firm. But if you are a manager of a public firm or of a state or municipality, if you will, then your key goal is to make a profit for everyone, to make everybody's life better. And this is what good governance is. It's about promotion of values and it's about accountability. Now, the close cousin of good governance is a rule of law. Now, rule of law, as technically should be called nomocracy, it's much easier to come up with the definition of the rule of law. There are many more of them. But again, one doesn't have to study law to know what the rule of law is. It is about well-written and non-ambiguous, transparent principles and rules, directives, regulations, laws, norms. And equally important, it's not just about writing good laws, it's about implementing them in practice and living by those laws. When it comes to substance of rule of law, one size doesn't fit all. You have various legal systems. You have a common law, you have a European law, or in other words, continental law. By the way, I'm by education a lawyer. So you have different legal systems. You don't have universal. In some fields you have universal laws, but each country is to a high degree allowed to adjust its legal system to its needs. So you cannot necessarily impose American legal order, just paste copy and put it into what Chinese legal order. But what rule of law is about, that all the laws are accessible to public, written in a clear and understandable way, and implemented in practice. So how important are good governance and rule of law? for many years, the basic concept, the road to promised land, if you will, from society torn by conflict or lack of development, poverty, to transform this society from bad state of affairs to prosperity and good state affairs, usually for many years the prevailing concept was first you have to establish security in the area and stabilize and stability. Then what has to come is economic recovery and development, and then once you have security, once you have economy running, then we shall deal with the human rights. But this concept is obsolete. Now it's more and more recognized and acknowledged that you need a holistic approach, that everything have to go in parallel, that you have to start immediately with building up not only security, not only economy, but with building good governance, rule of law, and human rights. Because the best comparison would be a tripod. 3 legs, like the one camera is on. One leg is made of security. The other leg is made of economy, and the third leg is made of good governance, rule of law, and human rights. And if you take one leg out, the whole structure crumbles. It cannot stand just on 2 legs. It needs 3. Now, let's go to European Union. European Union, which is the biggest common market in the world. It's a union of 28 independent states who are not only sharing their common values, they are sharing, to a large degree, their legal system. The bedrock of European Union is something known as acquis communautaire, which would be the joint legal body. And it's comprised of, roughly speaking, 140,000 pages. And it's growing, and it's ever-changing. And each and every member state has incorporated this legal body into its legal system. So if you want to join the European Union, the first thing you have to do is to adjust your legal system to fit perfectly with acquis communautaire. You don't negotiate acquis communautaire. You negotiate how much time it takes to accept it and whether you will be given some transitional periods for that. But you don't negotiate substance. You can negotiate acquis communautaire only from the position of member states once you joined Union. Croatia's experience with working on the acquis communautaire was that in parallel with writing the new laws and incorporating them in a legal system, we had to develop implementing structures. Because to have a law without structures able to implement it in practice is, I don't want to say job half done, it's job none done. There is a special chapter. I will not bother you with the accession process because it could take days to explain, and then you would decide that under no circumstances you would ever have to want to join the European Union. It's extremely difficult. But at the end of the day, it's immensely beneficial. There is a specific chapter devoted to judiciary. It's chapter number 23, and it's dealing with your legal system. And you have to organize your judiciary and legal system in a way that they can process and cope with this acquis communautaire. And what you learn from European Union point of view, that it's not just, as I said, laws, it's action plans, it's effective structures, and it's capacities. why European Union puts so much weight and effort on this. Because without this, common market cannot prosper. You cannot, as a member state, survive on a common market with all open market competition forces and rules if you don't have structures, capacities, good governance, and good legal framework to sustain all pressures and benefit from whatever this open market provides you with. So good governance and rule of law in the European Union is primarily a tool that enables your prosperity and enables your not only survival, but thriving on the market and competing on equal footing with the others. Now let's go to the United Nations. United Nations, of course, it's not union of 193 states. It's organization made of 193 states, where its sovereignty, it's absolute, contrary to European Union, where 28 of us, part of our sovereignty is surrendered in a common body. That's how the European Union works. Here, sovereignty of 193 states is absolute. And you cannot impose on any member states. You cannot go to a single member state and say, well, you need to adopt this law, you need to adopt that law. If you don't adopt the given law, you will not be a member of the United Nations. Of course, you will be. It doesn't work that way. But the point is not on imposing these values and laws on people, but making known and making more understandable why this is so important. And it's important primarily for development. Can you have a real sustainable development without good governance and the rule of law? The question can be answered through ongoing debate on sustainable development goals. Now, just to enable your better comprehension on the matter. As you know, United Nations developed Millennium Development Goals, and now we are inching in 2005. We shall end the phase of Millennium Development Goals implementation, and they will be replaced with something that will be known as Sustainable Development Goals. A number of goals that mankind has to achieve in the next 10 years, with the targets for their achievement. For the moment, there are 16 goals in the draft document, plus 17, which is means of implementation. But I'm now focusing on the Area 16. And Focus Area 16, which sounds like some secret facility in New Mexico, it's very much down to earth. It's about peaceful and inclusive society, rule of law, and capable institutions. It's for the first time then in a global concept of development, rule of law and capable institutions are projected as instrument for development, not as a final goal that shall be achieved through development, but as enabler of it. So the old concept that you deal with good governance and the rule of law once you reach high degree of development and you don't have any security threats, it's obsolete. You don't have to wait for that. On the contrary, the sooner you achieve good governance and the rule of law, the sooner you will have good economic and any other development. The scope is huge. Reducing crime and violence, eliminating discriminatory laws, policies and practices, inclusive decision making. And everything is interconnected, because you can toss into this picture women's issue, for instance. empowerment of women, participation of women into decision making. Yesterday there was a celebration in New York in Apollo Theater in Harlem of the 20th anniversary of Beijing Declaration of Women's Rights. And in this field, a tremendous achievement has been produced in the 20 years. So just to give you one example, how not only everything is interconnected, but how things really work when you project them on the down-to-earth situation from a nice phraseology, if you will. Economic empowerment of women, for instance. In post-war development, it is empirically proven that women are decisive force in rebuilding economic fabric of country torn by war. Because, for obvious reasons, many men are the men part of population is usually decimated by war. And women, even during the war, they were the bedrock to enable survival of the children. And women have a bigger percentage of family income than men in immediate post-war situations. So if you don't empower the women, you will have a much slower road to recovery. And then everything becomes interconnected. Security, development. Now, the problem is that a number of countries are still of the opinion that insisting on rule of law and good governance could be interpreted as interference into internal affairs of a sovereign nation. And there is a grain of truth in it, because, as I said, the point is not to come to a sovereign member state and say, look, this is a book of laws that you have to adopt. You have various legal cultures, you have various legal traditions. European continental law, in many ways, is different than Anglo-Saxon's common law. And then you have, in other parts of society, for instance, in the Islamic world, you have a completely different legal tradition. But the point is to implement whatever law you have. It has to be written in a transparent and understandable way and carried out. Implementation is as important as law itself. So, as I said, there can be no sustainable peace, not only without stability, not only without economy, but it cannot be without good governance and rule of law. So, for instance, good governance and rule of law is, let me give you the other example. Good governance and rule of law is essential for fighting corruption. Low corruption is essential for foreign direct investment. Because big companies, Samsung, Coca-Cola, whatever, IKEA, will not come in a corruption-torn economic environment. So low corruption means higher foreign direct investments. More foreign direct investments means more jobs. More jobs means more people satisfied with their way of life, especially former combatants. More jobs means more development means more security. Everything is interconnected. So I think that this is more and more recognized in developing world, that good governance is not ideological category. It's instrument for development. And I think this is absolutely, this is the key message that basically I leave with you. Think about these two categories primarily in terms of development. We hope that Area 16 will remain as a development goal, and that one of SDGs will be good governance and rule of law. But I would say that through these debates, we are creating a new corporate culture, and as to use UN language, one would say it's a cross-cutting horizontal power of good governance, but it's recognized more and more as essential ingredient of a good life. It's impossible to make a direct comparison with United Nations and European Union. These are two completely different animals. But when it comes to good governance and the rule of law, which is in the European Union absolutely on the top of priorities, when it comes to United Nations, it's climbing very fast on the priority list. It's growing in importance, it's growing in recognition. And let me give you, to conclude, by give you a simple example. Secretary General in April issued a report on sustainable urbanization. It's one of the many. And the example I'm giving you, you have many, many more of the same kind. And the title of this report is, I quote, Effective Governance, Policy Making and Planning for Sustainable Urbanization. So the report starts with effective governance, because this is a recipe for 21st century progress, effective governance. We are not talking about type of governance, we are not talking about political affiliation of the leaders chosen. It's up to the citizens of every country through democratic process. But whoever is chosen to the high office has to govern well. We are talking about principles. And these two principles, in my point of view, are two principles that will define the final success of our quest for not only sustainable development, but for much more prosperous 21st century. Thank you. These are good questions, and not easy questions to answer, because you know that many European countries have a very specific historical relations with some parts of Africa, and they carry special responsibility in more ways than one, and special connections with Africa. So it's not easy to calibrate the proper angle here. And I can certainly not speak on behalf of France. But 2 points. One, European Union is single biggest donor when it comes to assistance to Africa in development aid. The second point is that there are parts of Africa, I don't think that European Union goal is, or European countries want to interfere, especially not in military ways. But there are situations when this was left to Europeans. Mali is one example. Central African Republic is the other example. In Central African Republic, country that basically almost disintegrated, and it's torn with an extremely difficult conflict. Due to there is now European force besides French troops in Africa. What we would like as the European Union to see is that African peacekeeping forces taking a principal role, but sometimes you have to intervene immediately to save human lives. And I think that intervention in Bangui was more than appropriate, because it stabilized peace in Bangui. In Bangui, where, by the way, what European Union primarily wants to do is to rebuild the fabric of government. Now, talking about good governance, the first way towards stability in Central African Republic is to put basic government structures back into work, because without them, you cannot govern. And it's not the point that European Union governs in Bangui or United Nations. The point is that Central African government governs the country. But of course, this is not easy. It's a very, very, very complicated issue. You made a good point. Various parts of Africa has various historical traditions depending on the roots, and we know that there is a colonial past of Africa, which is very difficult past, but it left its mark, its deep mark. Let me end by saying that there are 2 degrees of involvement. The preferential way that European Union wants to be involved is through economic aid. Of course, there is a Francophone Africa, there is a Lusophone Africa, there is Anglophone Africa. There are countries which are more shaped on the French-speaking countries. Of course, they have specific ties, historical ties with France. There are some others with other parts of Europe. But what the European Union wants primarily to do is to be as much involved in development aid as possible. But sometimes when the conflict erupts and human lives have to be saved now, then I think that French intervention in Mali was not only timely, but basically it saved the day. I will stop here because some of the questions I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of France.
Further the cause of cessation of war. So that was my question.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. Time is short. Well, what you mentioned in your question partly is examples of bad governance. That's what I was talking about. The good governance is a bedrock of more than just good standards. If you don't have a good governance, the bottom line is you can't have good life for ordinary people. Hardcore security is the most important thing in Africa. But if we are focused just on hardcore security, then without putting good governance, rule of law, and development into picture, then Africa, which has immense rich potentials, shall not capitalize them. As we speak, in parts of war-torn Africa, Africa is being plundered. The diamonds are taken out of Africa. The minerals are taken. The wealth and richness of Africa is being plundered day by day. To stop this, you need 2 things. Yes, you need hardcore security in the areas, and I think that when it's really needed, international community steps in. The idea would be to have African forces, and I think it's primary responsibility of African Union, and Africa has primarily to be governed by, not exclusively governed by Africans, but sometimes you need others to step in for hardcore security. But hardcore security will be short-lived if not backed up by development, and you cannot have a firm framework for development if you don't govern in a good way. You mentioned examples of corruption, but basically what you mentioned is, as I said, bad governance. This has to be replaced with, while fully respecting sovereignty of a given state. Good governance is something that people on the ground not only need, they deserve. You are responsible towards them to provide them with. There are 2 key bodies in European Union, in United Nations: Security Council and Economic and Social Council. It would be a mistake to evaluate the scope of work and quality of work and influence of United Nations only through the work of Security Council, which is immensely important. But there is another equally important part of its scope, and this is ECOSOC, or European Economic and Social Council. And this is the most important debate this moment, as we speak in that building over there, is sustainable development goals. I spent many years in the United Nations, and it was always peace, security, peace, security. It still is. But for the first time, if If you go into the corridors of United Nations, more people talk about sustainable development goals than on any crisis area. Because sustainable development goals are blueprint for development for next 10, 15 years. And if they are executed properly, then Security Council will be left almost out of work. Security Council to be left out of work, which would be supreme ideal of the concept of the United Nations, to have 1 month without a single session of Security Council. Then we are all in the promised land. But to achieve that, you will not achieve this through the work of Security Council alone. You will achieve this primarily through the work of ECOSOC. ECOSOC has to produce results on the ground. If you want, the day you will have 193 Norways, then Security Council is out of work. Does Security Council has to exist? Let's suppose that the world exists only of Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Would you need Security Council? No. That's our goal. So that's why sustainable development goals are so important, and it's recognized. This is the story of the day. And within that story, good governance and the rule of law becomes a story of its own. So that's, I think that this is a ground for optimism. Thank you.